The smell of coffee clung to my clothes as I walked into the community center after my morning shift. I was running late as usual. Juggling my jobs as a caregiver and barista wasn't exactly easy, but this group meant something to me. It was one of the few things I did purely out of love, not obligation. I stepped into the small, cheerful room where the support group met every week. Familiar faces greeted me, but one new face stood out. A tall man with dark hair sat stiffly in one of the chairs, his white cane resting across his knees. He looked out of place, lost even, and his sunglasses couldn't hide the unease in his posture. "Hi, I'm Emily," I said, sliding into the chair beside him. "First time here?" He nodded, but didn't turn to me. "Yeah, Ethan." The silence that followed was heavy. I could tell he wasn't the talkative type, but I also knew that people who ended up here usually had something they needed to say. So I stayed quiet and waited. It didn't take long. "It's weird," he started, almost to himself. "Being here? Being like this?" "Like this?" I asked gently. "Blind," he said flatly. "I wasn't always. Car accident, 6 months ago." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "That's a big adjustment." "That's an understatement," he said with a bitter laugh. "I lost my sight, my independence, my fiancée. She couldn't handle it, didn't want to deal with the burden, as she called it." His words hung in the air, sharp and raw. My heart ached for him. I didn't know what it was like to lose so much all at once, but I did know what it felt like to be discarded when life got tough. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "That must have been devastating." He finally turned his head toward me, as if gauging the sincerity in my voice. "Yeah, it was. Still is. It's like, I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I was, everything I built my life around, it's gone." "You're still here," I pointed out. "That counts for something, and who you are isn't tied to what you've lost. You're more than your sight, Ethan." For the first time, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You sound like you believe that." "I do," I said firmly. "And maybe, in time, you will too." The rest of the group session passed in a blur, but I stayed close to Ethan. He didn't say much more, but he seemed less tense by the end. As we left the room, he thanked me awkwardly, and I gave him my number in case he ever wanted to talk. I didn't know then how much that small gesture would change my life, or how much his presence would reshape my world. But there was something about Ethan that made me want to stick around and find out. The first time I guided Ethan across a busy street, I thought he might bolt into traffic just to escape the awkwardness. "Relax," I told him, squeezing his arm gently as we stood at the edge of the curb. "I've got you. Trust me." "Trust isn't exactly my strong suit these days," he muttered, gripping his cane tightly. I laughed softly, even though his words carried weight. "Oh, well, lucky for you, I'm not easily offended. Let's take it one step at a time. Literally." That day we spent hours navigating the city together. I showed him tricks for identifying landmarks with sound and touch, how to count steps between familiar locations, and how to listen for subtle cues, like the hum of a streetlight or the rhythm of passing traffic. At first he stumbled, both figuratively and literally. But as the days passed, he began to trust his instincts, and eventually me. Ethan was stubborn, though. There were moments when he snapped, frustrated with himself and the world. "I hate this," he'd say after bumping into a signpost or losing his orientation. "I hate feeling useless." "You're not useless," I'd reply firmly, each time more insistent than the last. "You're learning, and that takes time. You're allowed to be frustrated, but don't let it define you." Little by little, the walls he'd built around himself started to crack. I saw glimpses of the person beneath the bitterness, a man who was funny, intelligent, and fiercely determined, even when he didn't believe it himself. And to my surprise, I started to fall for him. It wasn't just his resilience or the way he tried so hard, even when he thought no one was watching. It was the way he listened, really listened, to everything I said. It was the rare moments when he let himself laugh, a sound that felt warm and genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. One evening, we sat on a bench in the park, the air cool and still around us. I watched as Ethan tilted his head back, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "You know, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be enough. For anyone. I frowned. What do you mean? I mean, who wants to be with someone who's broken? His voice was low, almost a whisper. Melissa left because I wasn't whole anymore? What if she was right? My heart ached at the vulnerability in his words. Without thinking, I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. You're not broken, Ethan, I said firmly, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he turned toward me, his expression unreadable but soft. Do you really mean that? I do, I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. And you are enough. More than enough. That was the moment our bond shifted, deepened. And though neither of us said it out loud, I knew we were no longer just two people navigating a difficult world. We were something more, something that felt a lot like love. The day Ethan proposed felt like stepping into a dream I didn't dare let myself imagine. We were sitting on the worn couch in my tiny apartment, surrounded by the clutter of our everyday lives. His cane propped in the corner, my books scattered across the coffee table, and a faint smell of burnt toast lingering from a failed breakfast experiment. It was ordinary, and that's what made it perfect. I've been thinking, Ethan said, fiddling with a small velvet box in his hands. His fingers traced the edges nervously, a rare crack in his usually steady demeanor. About how you've stood by me through everything? I blinked, setting down the mug of tea I'd been sipping. You don't need to thank me for that. I know, he said quickly, his lips twitching into a smile, but I want to. I want to do more than thank you. Emily, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a life I didn't think I could have. You've shown me I'm more than my disability, more than what happened to me. My heart started pounding as he slid off the couch and knelt on one knee. Ethan, Emily, will you marry me? His voice was steady now, his face full of hope and vulnerability. I may not be able to give you the life you deserve yet, but I promise I'll spend every day trying. I covered my mouth, tears streaming down my face as I nodded. Yes, Ethan, of course, yes. The ring wasn't extravagant, a modest silver band with a small diamond, but it was perfect. I didn't need extravagance. I needed him, and in that moment, I had him completely. Planning the wedding brought its own challenges. Ethan's parents, Martha and William, were polite but distant when he told them about our engagement. They were accustomed to a life of luxury and connections, and I could sense their unspoken doubts about me, the girl from a small town who worked part-time jobs just to get by. Emily, Martha said one afternoon, her tone carefully measured as we sipped tea at their sprawling estate. You've done a lot for Ethan, and we're grateful. But marriage, well, it's a significant commitment. Are you sure you're ready for the responsibilities that come with it? I met her gaze, determined to stand my ground. I've been committed to Ethan since the day I met him. I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Carter. William, sitting nearby, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It was clear they weren't convinced, but over time, their opinions softened. They saw how Ethan flourished with me by his side, how he regained confidence, laughed more, and faced his challenges with determination. One evening, Martha pulled me aside after dinner. You know, she said, her voice quieter than usual, when Ethan lost his sight, we thought we'd lost him too, but you brought him back to us. Thank you, Emily. Hearing those words felt like a victory I didn't know I needed. Our wedding was small but beautiful, held in a quaint chapel with just a few close friends and family members. Ethan's parents surprised me by covering the costs, turning what I thought would be a simple ceremony into a magical day. As I walked down the aisle, Ethan stood at the altar, his hands gripping his cane, his smile lighting up the room. I can't see you, he whispered when I reached him, his voice filled with emotion. But I know you're the most beautiful thing I'll ever know. We exchanged vows that felt more like promises for survival than fairy tale declarations. Our love wasn't built on grand gestures or romantic ideals. It was built on the small, everyday moments that mattered most. After the wedding, we moved into a cozy apartment, one we could afford without relying too much on his parents. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I learned to read Braille to leave Ethan sweet notes around the house. He memorized my favorite songs to hum them when I felt stressed. But life wasn't without its challenges. Ethan sometimes struggled with his independence, and there were moments when his frustrations spilled over into our relationship. I learned to be patient during those times, knowing that the man I loved was still there beneath the anger and self-doubt. Through it all, we built a life together, a patchwork of love, resilience, and hope. And despite everything, I believed we were strong enough to weather any storm. For a while, it felt like we were. The day Ethan decided to go through with the surgery was one I'll never forget. For weeks, we talked it over, weighing the risks and the potential rewards. I could see the fear in his eyes every time I brought it up. The idea of hoping for something so monumental and possibly being let down terrified him. But I believed in him, believed that he deserved to have that chance. Ethan, I said one evening as we sat on the couch, his hand in mine. You've faced so much already. What's one more challenge? If this works, it could change everything. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. And if it doesn't? What if I wake up and it's all just darkness again? Then we'll face it together, I promised, squeezing his hand. Like we always have. He stayed quiet for a long time, but I saw something shift in him. He wasn't just considering it anymore. He was starting to hope. The hospital felt colder than usual that morning. Ethan was unusually quiet as we sat in the waiting room, surrounded by sterile white walls and the faint beeping of distant monitors. I tried to fill the silence with comforting words, but he didn't respond much, just nodding occasionally. When the nurse called his name, he turned to me, his face a mixture of fear and determination. Emily, he said softly, reaching out for my hand. No matter what happens, thank you for everything. You don't have to thank me, I whispered, blinking back tears. You just focus on coming back to me, okay? He nodded, and they wheeled him away, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. The hours crawled by like days. Every time a doctor or nurse walked by, I sat up straighter, hoping for news. I tried distracting myself with a book, but the words blurred together. My mind was filled with 1,000 what-ifs. What if it didn't work? What if something went wrong? What if he woke up and things were different between us? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon came out. Still in his scrubs, his expression was calm, almost casual, as if he didn't just hold my entire world in his hands. The surgery went well, he said with a reassuring smile. It'll take some time for his vision to fully adjust, but he's already responding to light. I felt a wave of relief so powerful I almost collapsed. Can I see him? Of course, he's still a bit groggy, but you can go in. When I walked into the recovery room, Ethan was sitting up in bed, blinking at the light filtering through the window. His eyes, which had always been so expressive, even in blindness, now darted around the room, trying to take in every detail. Ethan, I said softly, stepping closer. He turned toward the sound of my voice, his gaze landing on me for the first time. For a moment, he just stared, his expression unreadable. Then his lips curved into a smile, and his eyes filled with tears. I see you, he whispered, his voice cracking. Emily, I see you. I couldn't hold back my own tears as I rushed to his side, taking his hand. I'm here, I said, smiling through my sobs. And you're going to be okay. He lifted his free hand, hesitating for a moment before brushing it against my face, tracing the lines of my jaw, my nose, my lips. You're beautiful, he said, his voice filled with wonder. In that moment, all my fears seemed to melt away. This was it. This was the start of a new chapter for us. I believed with every fiber of my being that this would only make us stronger. Over the next few days, Ethan's vision continued to improve. Watching him rediscover the world was both heartwarming and bittersweet. He marveled at simple things, colors, shadows, the way the sunlight danced through the leaves outside the window. Everything feels new, he said one afternoon as we sat by the window, his hand resting on mine. It's like I've been living in a dream, and now I'm finally awake. You have so much to look forward to, I said, smiling, and I'll be here for all of it. But even as I said it, I noticed something I couldn't quite put my finger on. There was a distance in his eyes, a flicker of something that made my stomach churn. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just my own insecurity playing tricks on me. For now, I wanted to believe that this was our happy ending. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. At first, I told myself it was all in my head. After everything Ethan had been through, it was normal for him to act a little different. Seeing the world again had to be overwhelming. But as the weeks went by, the distance between us only grew. Ethan wasn't the same man I had married. And deep down, I think I knew why. It started innocently enough. At least that's what Ethan claimed when I caught him scrolling through his phone late one night. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light as I set down my book. "No one important," he said quickly, locking the screen and placing the phone face down on the nightstand. "Just an old friend." But he was a terrible liar. Over the next few days, I noticed him glued to his phone more often. I'd hear the occasional chuckle or see the small, secretive smile on his face. One afternoon, when I walked into the living room unexpectedly, he practically jumped off the couch, stuffing his phone into his pocket. "Who's Melissa?" I finally asked one evening when I couldn't hold it in any longer. Ethan froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. "How do you know about her?" "I saw her name pop up on your phone the other day," I admitted. "I didn't mean to snoop, but who is she?" He set his fork down and sighed. "She's my ex-fiancée. We've been catching up. That's all." "Catching up?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Ethan, you told me she left you when you went blind. Why would you want to talk to someone who abandoned you?" "She didn't abandon me," he said defensively. "It was complicated. And now that I can see again, I don't know, Emily, she's been supportive. It's nice to have someone who understands that part of my life." His words stung more than I cared to admit. "I've been here, Ethan. I've supported you through everything." "I know," he said, sounding more annoyed than apologetic. "But you don't understand what it's like to lose everything and then get it back." He didn't need to say it outright for me to understand. Melissa represented the life he used to have, the life I had never been a part of. As his conversations with Melissa grew more frequent, Ethan began to pull away from me. The little things I used to love about our relationship, our late night talks, the way he'd hold my hand without thinking, started to disappear. I noticed the way he looked at me now. His eyes, which used to be so full of warmth, seemed critical, almost cold. One day, as I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables, I caught him staring at me. "What's wrong?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. "Nothing," he said quickly, but his gaze lingered. "It's just, you look different than I imagined." My heart sank. I knew he didn't mean it as a compliment. The comparison started subtly but became more pointed over time. He'd make comments about Melissa's career, her sense of style, her sophistication. I could feel myself shrinking under the weight of his words, no matter how hard I tried to push them aside. Melissa always knew how to dress for an occasion. He said one evening as we got ready for a dinner with his parents. I had spent an hour picking out an outfit, but suddenly it didn't feel good enough. "Well, I'm not Melissa," I snapped, trying to hide how much his comment hurt. "No, you're not," he said softly, almost wistfully. That night, I cried myself to sleep while he scrolled through his phone, oblivious to the pain he was causing me. I tried to fight for us. I really did. I planned date nights, cooked his favorite meals, and even bought new clothes, hoping to rekindle what we had. But nothing worked. Ethan was there, but it felt like he had already left me. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, staring at the wedding band on my finger. It had meant so much to me once. Now, it felt like a weight I couldn't carry. "Are you happy?" I asked Ethan that evening as we sat in silence, the TV playing in the background. "What kind of question is that?" he asked, not even looking up from his phone. "Just answer me," I said, my voice trembling. "Are you happy with me?" He hesitated for a moment too long. "Emily, you're a good person, but I don't know if this is what I want anymore." My heart shattered, but I couldn't bring myself to cry. Not in front of him. "Is it Melissa?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. That night, as Ethan slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The man I had stood by, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally was slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold on to him. The tension in the house had been building for weeks. Ethan and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was strained and shallow. I felt like I was tiptoeing around a stranger, not the man I'd married. Something was coming. I could feel it. I just didn't know how much it would hurt. It was a quiet evening, the kind we used to cherish. I'd made dinner, hoping we could at least have one moment that felt normal. Ethan sat across from me, pushing food around on his plate, barely eating. His face was drawn, his brow furrowed. Finally, he put his fork down and looked at me. "Emily, we need to talk." Those 5 words felt like a thunderclap. My stomach tightened as I set my glass down carefully. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Things are different now. I'm different now. Melissa has been really understanding. She gets what I've been through." Understanding? I wanted to scream. I'd been the one who'd stood by him, who'd guided him through the darkest time of his life. "I don't understand," I said. "What does this mean for us?" Ethan finally looked up, his eyes hard. "It means I think I need to move on. With her." The room spun. "Ethan," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm, "I've been here for you, every step of the way. When you lost your sight, when you struggled to adjust, when no one else was there." "I know you were," he interrupted, his tone impatient. "But now that I can see, things feel different. You were amazing when I needed someone, Emily. But Melissa, she's beautiful, sophisticated. She fits into the life I want to have again." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, what? You're saying my love and support only mattered when you were blind? Now that you can see I'm not good enough?" "That's not what I'm saying," he replied, but his hesitation said otherwise. "It's just, Melissa and I had something special before, and now that I can see her again, I realize how much I miss that." Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. "Ethan, I gave you everything. I built my life around you. How can you just throw that away?" "I need to find myself," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I need to figure out who I am now, and I can't do that with you." I didn't fight him. What was the point? The man I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "If that's what you want," I said, my voice breaking, "then I won't stop you. Let's get this over with." Ethan didn't try to stop me as I stood up and left the room. He didn't try to apologize or comfort me. He didn't even look back. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My heart was broken, my world shattered. But one thing was clear. Ethan had made his choice, and it wasn't me. It's incredible how quiet a place can feel after a storm. After Ethan left, that's what my life was. A vast, deafening quiet. The kind that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. The home we'd shared felt empty, cold, and unfamiliar. It was clear I couldn't stay there, surrounded by the ghost of what we'd once had. So I packed what little I could and left. I found a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, a creaky one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanged like an old bell. But it was mine. It wasn't tied to Ethan, to Melissa, to the life I'd built around him. It was a place where I could start over, even if I wasn't sure how. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd get up early, take on extra shifts at the cafe, and work until my body ached. Anything to keep my mind busy, to stop myself from spiraling into the endless loop of what-ifs. What if I'd been enough for Ethan? What if I'd fought harder? What if I hadn't believed we were strong enough to weather anything? But the questions didn't help. They only deepened the ache in my chest. After work, I'd collapse onto my thrift store couch, scrolling through my phone aimlessly, only to see photos of Melissa and Ethan on social media. They weren't even trying to hide it. A dinner here, a party there. Ethan looked happy, the kind of happiness that made me wonder if I'd ever made him smile like that. It was a particularly grueling Tuesday. I'd worked a double shift at the cafe. My body felt like it had been wrung out, and I was nauseous beyond belief. I assumed it was just the stress, my body catching up to the emotional toll I hadn't allowed myself to fully process. But the nausea didn't stop, neither did the exhaustion. Maybe you're just burnt out, my friend and coworker Mia said when I complained during a break. Or maybe you're pregnant, she joked, elbowing me playfully. I laughed it off at first, but later that night, the thought crept back into my mind. Pregnant? It wasn't possible, was it? I mean, Ethan and I, well, we hadn't exactly been careful toward the end. The next morning, I bought a test. I stared at the little box for hours, too scared to know the truth. Finally, I took it, and those two little lines appeared, clear as day. Positive. I sat on the bathroom floor, clutching the test like it might give me the answers I so desperately needed. My mind raced. A baby. Ethan's baby. What was I supposed to do? Should I tell him? Could I tell him? Part of me wanted to pick up the phone, to scream at him, "I'm carrying your child, and you don't even care." But another part of me knew that wouldn't change anything. Ethan had made his choice. He'd left me for someone else, someone who fit into his world better than I ever had. I made a decision then. I wouldn't tell Ethan. I wouldn't give him the chance to dismiss me again or treat our child like an afterthought. This baby would be mine, our own little world, separate from the pain Ethan had caused. The days that followed weren't easy. I had moments where I felt like I couldn't do it, where the weight of everything threatened to crush me. But then I'd remind myself I'd survived the worst heartbreak of my life. I'd moved on from the man who broke me, and I could do this too. Every time I thought about the tiny life growing inside me, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was a future worth fighting for. I wouldn't let Ethan's choices define me. Not anymore. Sitting in my tiny apartment, I kept turning my phone over in my hands. The weight of everything, my pregnancy, my heartbreak, the uncertainty, pressed down on me like a heavy fog. I couldn't do this alone. Not entirely. Ethan's parents, for all their wealth and status, had always been kind to me. They treated me like family, even when their son didn't. If anyone deserved to know, it was them. I decided to call Ethan's mom, Margaret. My heart raced as the phone rang, my mind conjuring a dozen scenarios where this could go horribly wrong. "Emily?" Her warm, familiar voice came through. "It's so good to hear from you. How are you?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. I'm okay, Margaret. I actually need to talk to you and Mr. Carlyle about something important." She immediately sensed the seriousness in my tone. "Of course, dear. Why don't you come over for lunch tomorrow?" The next day, I arrived at their grand estate, the house where Ethan and I had shared so many happy memories. It felt surreal stepping inside, knowing how much had changed. Margaret and Robert, Ethan's father, greeted me with open arms. As we sat in their sunlit dining room, sipping tea, I took a deep breath and finally said the words, "I'm pregnant." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Robert looked equally stunned, his usual calm demeanor shaken. "I didn't know how to tell you," I continued. "Ethan doesn't know. I don't think he deserves to know." Margaret lowered her hand, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Emily, what do you mean? What happened between you two?" I explained everything. The surgery, Melissa, the divorce. As I spoke, Margaret's face turned pale, and Robert's jaw tightened. They had no idea. Ethan had lied to them, spinning a story where I was the one who wanted out, claiming I had grown tired of him after the surgery. That ungrateful little... Margaret stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "Emily, I can't believe he would do this to you. To us." Robert leaned forward, his voice firm. "Emily, you've always been family to us. You're the one who stood by Ethan when he needed someone the most. We will support you in every way we can, financially, emotionally, whatever you need." Tears welled in my eyes as relief washed over me. Thank you. I didn't know who else to turn to. After lunch, Margaret and Robert exchanged a serious look. "He needs to face the consequences of his actions," Margaret said. "He's taken advantage of everyone around him for too long." Later that day, I learned that they had cut Ethan off from the family fortune. No more monthly allowances, no more trust fund. Margaret called him personally to tell him, and she didn't mince words. You've thrown away a good woman and a chance at happiness, Ethan. Until you learn to take responsibility for your life, we're done enabling you. As I left their estate, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't facing this alone. Margaret and Robert's unwavering support gave me the strength I needed to keep moving forward. My baby would grow up surrounded by love, and that was all that mattered. Life has a funny way of humbling the arrogant. When Ethan left me, he was so sure he was trading up, stepping back into a world of glamour and perfection. But reality has a way of catching up, and it didn't take long for everything he clung to so desperately to crumble. At first, Ethan's reunion with Melissa seemed like a dream come true, at least to him. They rekindled their romance in the glow of her promises to make him whole again. With his sight restored and Melissa by his side, Ethan reveled in the life he'd always dreamed of. Fancy dinners, exclusive events, and high society circles. But when his parents cut him off, Melissa's demeanor shifted. She stopped answering his calls as frequently. Her laughter when they were together started sounding hollow. Ethan noticed her subtle looks of impatience whenever they discussed his financial troubles. One night, he confronted her. Melissa, why are you acting like this? I thought we were in this together. She sighed, exasperated. Ethan, I'm not a charity case. I can't carry the both of us. You were supposed to rebuild your life. What happened to the ambitious man I fell for? What do you mean? I've been trying, but I need time. She cut him off. Time doesn't pay the bills, Ethan. I'm not going to waste my life with someone who can't stand on his own 2 feet. The words hit Ethan like a brick wall. For the first time, he saw Melissa for who she truly was, someone who had only returned for the lifestyle he could no longer provide. When she walked out of his apartment that night, she took more than her designer purse and coat. She took the last shred of the life he thought he'd regained. Without Melissa or his parents' money, Ethan's world grew smaller by the day. Bills piled up on his kitchen counter, unopened and unpaid. The apartment he had rented, once a symbol of his independence, now felt like a cage. He pawned off the expensive watches and gadgets he'd once flaunted, trying to scrape together enough for rent. His attempts to find a job proved fruitless. Ethan had never needed to work for anything before. His family's wealth had always cushioned him. Without connections, experience, or even a college degree, his options were slim. Employers weren't impressed by his family name when it came with no substance to back it up. Ethan's isolation deepened. His once busy phone went silent, his social circle evaporating as quickly as his bank account. Friends who had been eager to drink with him at exclusive clubs stopped answering his calls. It turned out they had been more interested in his money than his company. One evening, sitting alone in the dark, Ethan stared at the empty whiskey glass in his hand. The silence was deafening, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He thought about Melissa, about his parents, about me. He remembered how I had stood by him when no one else would, how I had cared for him in his most vulnerable moments. And he remembered the cruel words he'd thrown at me, the words that had driven me away. For the first time, he truly understood what he had lost. Months later, Ethan found himself living in a shabby studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. The grand estate, the luxurious cars, the glittering parties, they were all distant memories. He worked odd jobs to make ends meet, barely scraping by. Each day felt like a reminder of his fall from grace. He considered reaching out to his parents, but pride held him back. He knew they wouldn't bail him out again, not after the way he had treated me. He thought about calling me too, but the shame was too much to bear. Ethan was alone, truly alone, for the first time in his life. And as much as he hated to admit it, he had no one to blame but himself. One rainy evening, Ethan sat by the window, watching the drops streak down the glass. He thought about the life he could have had if he hadn't thrown it all away. He thought about the baby I was carrying, his child, and wondered if he'd ever get the chance to meet them. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: regret. It was too late to undo the past, but for the first time, he resolved to face the consequences of his actions. Whether or not he could ever make amends, he knew he had to try to become a better man. But deep down, Ethan knew he had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and it was a loss he would carry with him for the rest of his life. With the Carlyles' financial and emotional support, I finally started to feel like I could breathe again. Margaret and her husband, Robert, insisted I stay with them until I found my footing. At first, I hesitated, not wanting to feel like a charity case. But they were persistent, and in truth, their grand estate was the perfect sanctuary to rebuild my life. "You're family to us now," Robert said one evening as we sat in the cozy living room. "Ethan might have made his choices, but we won't turn our backs on you." Their generosity allowed me to focus on the future. I enrolled in online courses to finish my degree, something I had put on hold when Ethan and I got married. It was a strange feeling, being excited about my own goals for the first time in years. Each class I completed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I also started working part-time for a local nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful, and it gave me a sense of purpose. The steady routine, combined with the excitement of preparing for my baby, gave me hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Margaret became like a second mother to me. She accompanied me to every doctor's appointment, fussing over every detail of my health and the baby's development. She even started knitting tiny sweaters and blankets, something she hadn't done in years. "I never thought I'd get to be a grandmother," she admitted one day, her voice tinged with emotion as she folded a baby blanket she had just finished. "Thank you for giving us this gift, Emily." Her words made my heart swell. For so long, I had felt unwanted and cast aside. But Margaret and Robert showed me what true, unconditional love looked like. Robert, in his own quiet way, made sure I had everything I needed. He set up a trust fund for the baby, ensuring their future would be secure. He even encouraged me to dream bigger. "You're capable of great things, Emily," he said one evening over dinner. "Don't let anyone, not even our foolish son, make you think otherwise." Their kindness and unwavering support helped me heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. I started to see my situation not as a tragedy, but as a second chance, a chance to build a life where I and my child would be truly valued. As my due date approached, I moved into a cozy apartment not far from Ethan's parents. It was small, but it was mine, and decorating the nursery became my favorite pastime. Every painted wall and carefully chosen piece of furniture felt like a declaration. I am capable, and I will give my child the love and stability they deserve. I began to reconnect with old friends, slowly rebuilding my social circle. I even started attending parenting classes where I met other expectant mothers who became a source of encouragement and laughter. It was comforting to share this journey with people who understood the excitement and nerves of bringing a new life into the world. One afternoon, while folding tiny baby clothes, I paused to take it all in. The woman I saw in the mirror was different from the one who had begged Ethan to stay. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My child would grow up with a mother who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. One day, Margaret found me sitting in the nursery, holding a framed ultrasound picture. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Emily," she said softly, sitting beside me. Her words brought tears to my eyes. "I just want to do everything right," I admitted. "You already are," she assured me, "and we'll be here every step of the way." As comforting as her words were, I knew there was one loose end I had to address: Ethan. Despite the pain he caused, he was still the father of my child. But any hopes I had of him stepping up as a parent were extinguished when Margaret told me how his life had unraveled. Melissa had left him, and he was struggling to make ends meet. "He's not the man I thought he was," I said, more to myself than to her. "No," Margaret agreed. "But you, my dear, are more than we ever deserved." Hearing her say that felt like the final piece of my healing. I didn't need Ethan's validation or love. I had built a new life on my own terms, surrounded by people who truly cared for me. And with my child on the way, I knew my future was brighter than ever. As I lay in bed that night, feeling the baby kick for the first time, I whispered softly, "We're going to be okay, better than okay." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.